Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So, welcome back to a new video. I figured I'd go through some more hypothetical 2028 presidential predictions, and I figured since we did the second most likely person to become the Democratic nominee in Kamala Harris, why don't we choose someone unlikely? Andy Beshear, by then the former governor of Kentucky, has been rumored to be a potential pick for president. He's about as extreme as the Democratic base, and he represents a Republican state, which could feed into a lot of people who are electorally minded for wanting to pick a Democratic nominee who can win crossover voters. Now, did he win that gubernatorial election with crossover voters? Yeah, to some extent. He significantly underperformed expectations in the suburban counties both times, and really only won because of his last name and his father being a moderate governor, which helped him in places like coal country. But he was a mild overperformer. All things considered in 2023. Could that be because it was in an off year and turnout was low, which hurt Republicans? Could that be because he went up against a weak Republican nominee? No, it must be because he's the second coming of Jesus. Now, I would say he'd be a somewhat formidable candidate. Obviously, Vance would be favored because it's going to be hard for any Democrat to win the presidency, never mind someone as bland and unpalatable as Andy Beshear with no charisma. But this happened. I think I have to add a parental advisory warning. So, if you're a child, tune out now. Um, Andy Bashir, not recently, but somewhat recently, August 2024, had a massive scandal where he said that JD Vance's family members should be raped. Now, whether that's him being a complete pervert or just how he takes out his anger, either way, it really doesn't bode well for him. I can imagine on a debate stage if him being angry about, these boogeymen that he's created for himself, about JD Vance wanting all women to die, it makes him threaten to rape JD Vance's family members, or it wasn't him, just say that his family members should be raped. Imagine how this guy would do on a debate stage. And from what I know, in the 2023 debates, he really didn't do that well against, of course, Daniel Cameron, who wasn't the best nominee. He could be a senator soon, but probably isn't the strongest. So, overall, contrary to popular belief, I think that Andy Bashir would be a pretty weak nominee. I think this comment alone tanks his campaign. I don't think he'd be nominated in the primary also, because he's a straight white male, and Democrats really aren't looking for that type of candidate. Um, Even if he would win Ohio, they wouldn't nominate him. But in the case that he is nominated, I do think that stuff like this, like the brutal side of politics, like almost, I want to say like fascist like, but fascist is like kind of a right wing ideology, like the same type of Nazi philosophy of like dehumanizing Republicans, like saying they're subhuman. He feeds into that a lot, which I think could help him among the Democratic base. Since I think the majority of Democrats really don't consider their political opponents human. I think the majority of Democrats who are like, I'm not saying Democratic voters because I really don't think they have too much of a say in the process, but the Democratic establishment really doesn't consider their opponents human. Uh, they're just that evil of people. So I think he'd have a decent chance if he continues making comments like this, but I really don't think it would help him with the general electorate. So, anyways, here we are. We have the presidential election results here. I think this is the baseline. Vance should probably once again outperform the previous election in every state, including Kentucky. I really can't see Andy Bashir having too much appeal here when, I mean, realistically, the only place he would do much better in is suburbia, and even so, he hasn't done that good in suburbia in his gubernatorial runs, though I could perhaps see Vance imploding in coal country, but Vance is also from Kentucky originally. At most, it's like a 2 point shift to Andy Bashir. You have to think about how terribly Andy Bashir does in the suburbs. So I say, for the most part, you do see some factions of the Democratic establishment, mostly establishmentarian voters like suburbanites, especially women, be infuriated by the comments that Bashir has made, um, and the terrible things he said about J.D. Vance's wife, even his infant children. Um, I think you see that really tank Bashir. So I'd say, as a baseline, most of these states would end up safe Republican, including Kentucky, including Iowa and Ohio. I really don't see them swinging that much to the Democrats, if at all. And I think Maine second creeps right above that 10-point line. A weird one. I actually do think Arizona would end up safe for JD Vance in this scenario. The reason Arizona swung so Republican was two things: Hispanic shifts, which I don't think Beshear has any appeal to Hispanics whatsoever. There's really none of them in Kentucky, so you can't even make that argument. Um, and I really don't see how he would have any appeal to them whatsoever, especially if Marco Rubio is going to be Vance's VP. And I think that, especially Andy Beshear being a terrible candidate, comes mostly from how he would infuriate suburbanites with his comments. And Arizona is very suburban. I do think a lot of them swung against Kamala Harris in 2024, but like stuff like Greg Stanton's district was a Romney district. Like, if you're doing that terribly, um, because like you're that atrocious of a candidate to suburbanites, like there's a chance Vance could win Arizona's fourth, which would mean that he wins 7 out of 9 congressional districts in Arizona. I think in this scenario, he probably does. I think Beshear does that bad among suburbanites that he ends up losing Arizona by over 10%. Now, Beshear wins California, Washington, Oregon's 50-50, but I think Oregon's progressive enough to the point where they wouldn't swing under 10%. Hawaii, we got Maryland, DC. I think Delaware's trending Democrat enough that even though it would swing Republican, it wouldn't swing Republican by the 5% necessary uh, to get it under 10. And we got Vermont, and we got Massachusetts, and we got Maine's first. So Andy Beshear is getting completely destroyed in this scenario. It's not even close whatsoever. And if we go to the likely states, Nevada, I think, is the first likely state. Once again, he doesn't have any strength with Hispanics ones whatsoever, and he really underperforms in places like Washoe County with suburbanites, even the suburban areas of Clark County. I think Nevada, part of its swing right was suburbanized, but also I do think it was mainly uh, focused on the service industry, like a lot of the no tax on tip stuff, and not even the idea that like a single policy flipped the state, but more Trump's campaign being more of a populist, anti-establishmentarian campaign. I think helped here, and I don't think. I think Vance can maintain that anti-establishmentarian flair, even if he is the incumbent vice president, just because Democrats do control the establishment of this country. And I think to some extent, if the GOP can translate that into like a full populist idea, then maybe you can push it forward even when you're in the White House. But I'd say Nevada, probably just based on Hispanic trends alone, ends up likely Republican, but it could be like as high as 8 or 9% if the GOP is able to properly capitalize on that anti-establishmentarian momentum and that populist momentum in like Clark County or anything. Uh, North Carolina, I would say, is probably likely Republican as well. North Carolina is not really the same as Georgia. While Georgia, these suburban trends are pushed by demographic change. North Carolina, you have a similar thing where white voters vote pretty Republican, but also these suburbs aren't fueled solely by black trends. These suburbs are still very well educated. Like the Research Triangle, it's called the Research Triangle for a reason. It does have quite a few black voters in it, but it's not exclusively black. Like most of the Democratic base in Georgia, I think there's quite a few places for Vance to make inroads with, um, or mainly Beshear to lose with. I think in other election scenarios, I think it's Vance pushing forward the Republican coalition. Here, like the main area Vance is overperforming with is suburbanites. It's just Beshear being an atrocious candidate and a terrible human being that sinks his campaign here. It really isn't like Vance saving the Republican Party. I think there's a scenario in which he can do that. Um, Against someone like Newsom, I think it's not really Newsom or Harris. I don't think it's Newsom or Harris being a terrible nominee. I think it's more just the coalitions changing. But against Beshear, like these North Carolina suburban areas really shouldn't be swinging like 5 or 6 points Republican in any scenario. But in this scenario, they are just because Beshear's that bad of a candidate for suburbanites and for the educated. I think he could do okay in Appalachia. That's kind of his base of support based on his last name. I really don't think that extends too much outside of Kentucky. Maybe like on the border of Kentucky, maybe slightly better in Tennessee. Um, at best, he does like a point better in uh, West Virginia. These counties right here, not really close to Ohio. Uh, Probably he's cucked by Vance being from Ohio and having a similar appeal So I could see potentially, like, on a really good night for Bashir, where like he's not getting crushed and he's only losing by like maybe 4% of the popular vote. I could see him perhaps doing slightly better on these Appalachian counties, but I just don't think his appeal extends too much outside of his home state. It's like if Phil Scott ran for president as a Republican after threatening to rape the vice president's family. Like, he's okay in Vermont, but he really doesn't have a brand that can extend outside of there. Phil Scott's for a different reason because he's not a Republican. Instead, he's a Democrat with an R next to his name. But Beshear is because he's just a rabid progressive. He was elected in a Republican state because he has no real power whatsoever. He's never been under intense scrutiny. He's ran against two of the worst statewide nominees in history, uh, both of his gubernatorial runs, and he's grifting off his last name, which is big in Kentucky. Like, there's really no other reason why he's won Kentucky. It's not because he's a phenomenal candidate like people pretend he is. It's because him being a terrible, horrible human being who disgusts me thoroughly. Like, I'm sure if Kentucky, like, if Daniel Cameron had those scandals go off of, if like him saying practically rape them back, Zeldin Stan, if that was like a main issue of the Kentucky gubernatorial campaign, I don't think Beshear would have won. But Daniel Cameron was running a horrible campaign, pretending he was Youngkin in a state that has nothing similar to Virginia besides where they share a border, when Youngkin's entire political strategy was focus on the state I'm in, appeal to the state I'm in, but the GOP was so starved for wins in the gubernatorial offices that like they just copied that and ran it everywhere else. I don't know. I don't know how this son of a bitch has stayed elected in Georgia, but I think, or not Georgia. I'm Freudian slip. I think either Michigan or Georgia would end up likely Republican in this scenario. I think Michigan's more likely to be likely Republican in this scenario. Uh, I think Beshear probably. I mean, even excusing like his rape scandals, like I just don't think he has an appeal to like Wayne County. And the problem, I've explained this in videos. Wayne County or bust is the Democrat strategy in Michigan. And if you bust there and do like 5, 6 points worse and collapse in the rest of the state, you're not winning Michigan. So I think Michigan ends up in that scenario, R+5, R+6. And I think especially creators in places like Oakland, Macomb, suburban areas, he probably ends up losing Kent County, which is insane for a Democrat to lose Kent County and Genesee as well, because I really don't think he has any populist appeal whatsoever to these working class areas. But I'd say that's it for the likely Republican states. Likely Democrat. Colorado, he underperforms a lot with suburbanites. Progressives, perhaps. Could stick with his campaign more, especially what I've said about like dehumanizing Republicans. I don't think that they really mind some of the comments fans, not Vance, Andy Beshear said towards Vance. I think honestly they might support what he's threatened to do to Vance's children. But I do think you lose a bit in the Denver metropolitan area, especially the suburban counties, which are trending Republican. Hispanics you don't do well in, and even some of these suburban counties like Chaffee County, I don't think shifts another 6 points Democrat. Uh, Jefferson County, El Paso County probably rebound a little bit, and it's temporary. I don't think that those counties ever shift Republican again after this election cycle or after 2028. But I think you can do slightly better there as a Republican and knock the state under 10 points. Same thing for Rhode Island and Connecticut. Bashir really doesn't have appeal here. I think Vance's Catholicism could help him a lot here, but I think these could be close, like 8 or 7 point margin, especially Rhode Island. I think even could go down to like a 6 point margin. I think you see in these suburban areas outside Hartford and Bridgeport, New Haven, Vance does much better running it up more. You could even see like a bit of a fall off in like Hartford and especially Bridgeport. The Bridgeport area and the Connecticut Panhandle, even New Haven, have been trending quite Republican. New York City metropolitan area, New York City media market, especially with how much New York is shifting Republican, that can help quite a bit. Rhode Island as well. You have Providence shifting pretty Republican. I think Vance flips Kent County. I think he probably doesn't do that great in like Washington, Newport, Bristol County, but like Kent and Providence, I think shift pretty heavily Republican to the point where like Providence could be under 5. Which that's the majority of the state, but it probably votes to the right of the state in the future. So the state could be like an induction of the state into like a swing state, kind of quasi swing state role. heading into the future. I also think New York is like a 5 point win in this scenario. I think Kamala Harris already really didn't do good in the suburbs. Places like Nassau, Suffolk, even the suburban areas of Queens, Staten Island shift heavily Republican here. I think Queens is honestly under 15 in this scenario. But I also think Vance would do pretty well in the Hudson Valley area. Probably flip like Dutchess and Rensselaer and Saratoga. A lot of these upstate counties, which is kind of the key to making New York closer. I think if you're not able to do better in the Hudson Valley and upstate and these suburban areas, upstate New York, it could be competitive long term, but you're relying a lot on the city, and if you hit your ceiling in the city, you're shit out of luck. But I think in this scenario, Beshear collapses enough in like the Hudson Valley, um, the northern portion of the state, stuff like Essex, Saratoga, Broome County, all those counties end up flipping to Vance. And I think because of that collapse, the state can end up much closer than I'd usually predict it as, but I don't think a lean margin just yet. I don't think Andy Beshear is as terrible of a candidate as someone like John Stewart. Illinois also is likely. I don't think it's as close as New York, but I do think you see Democrats significantly underperform in some of these suburban areas. You probably see Vance pick off some counties like Winnebago, DeKalb, Kendall, Will County on a good night, maybe even Jackson County, which shifted left. I was expected to flip to Trump, or at least I expected it to flip to Trump. But Kamala Harris was able to hold it. Very university heavy town. Maybe even something like McLean, Peoria on a good night for Vance. Otherwise, probably nothing. But Cook County also, I don't think Beshear has any appeal to Cook County, like inner city Chicago. And there's some suburban areas in Cook County, which I think he underperforms in. So I'd say the state ends up like a 7 to 8 point win for Andy Beshear. So now we move on to the lean states. And I'd say the first lean state is Georgia. I, I could see him. I could see him potentially pushing the trends forward a little bit in Atlanta, but I think the problem is I just don't see black voters turning out for Andy Beshear. I don't think the scandal of like him threatening to rape Vance's infant daughters hurts him too much in Georgia because I think the college-educated suburban population is pretty heavily Republican, and I don't really see that making inroads with black people. They're just too much of a monolith of a group for a scandal like that to change their votes too much. But I do think black voters don't turn out as heavily for him. And I think because of that, you see inner city Atlanta, especially, but even the northern suburbs begin to shift Republican, and the rest of the state probably also shifts Republican. So you could see stuff like Cobb, Gwinnett, those margins narrow a little bit, which really hurts Democrats in the state. And then Cherokee, Forsyth, Hall, some of these other counties along the north perhaps could also shift a little bit Republican. And you see Republicans pick off a few more of these black belt counties, one, two, three, four being the most likely, but even Clay County potentially on a good night. Um, on a really good night, something like Talbot County. So I think Georgia ends up lean Republican. Pennsylvania as well. I've made my thoughts clear on Pennsylvania. How I don't think it's great for the GOP long term. Keyword long term. I think Vance does a lot better in the suburban counties. I think Chester could honestly be under 10 in this scenario. Um, Montgomery and Delaware shift kind of similar to 2024, maybe a little bit more. It's bordering on that 5 point margin. I think Beshear is just a bad enough candidate for the suburbs, which is the main Democratic coalition in Pennsylvania. I don't think he loses too much in Allegheny, maybe a little bit, like 1 to 2%, but not nearly enough. Um, to make the state anywhere close to or make the state over 5%. I think maybe you could see a few of these counties flip. Northeastern Pennsylvania, I do think continue to shift Republican. Maybe you could see a few counties flip like Lehigh, Lackawanna probably, Dauphin maybe, Center County probably, and you could see counties like Bucks, Monroe, Northampton solidify for the GOP. But I think the problem is, I really don't see the GOP doing too much better in these rural areas. I think they're maxed out there. So while if these rural areas were like Michigan or Wisconsin rural areas, it would be a 5 point margin. Which is why Michigan is a 5 point margin. I don't think Pennsylvania really can be a 5 point margin unless you're nominating someone as terrible as like John Stewart. But Beshear, he at least isn't a complete betrayal of the Democrat coalition, and a lot of the hyper partisans will get behind him. So I think he wins, or he wins enough votes in the Philly collar counties to only lose Pennsylvania by like 4 to 5%. Wisconsin, I also think is like a 3% margin. Um, I think he really slows down, if not reverses, some of these trends. in the WoW counties. I don't think he gains at all in the Driftless area. I think, in fact, Vance probably does better. He probably flips Green County, maybe Iowa or Rock. Portage, it's hard because Portage are always on the cusp of winning it every single cycle. I think this might be the cycle in 2028 that Vance ends up flipping Portage. Door, probably not. You're probably screwed there. But he could do better in areas like La Crosse, Eau Claire, maybe the northern area of Wisconsin. Continue like this ring of shifts. Or like these shifts along the borders of Wisconsin and like in the Kenosha area, very working class, really the only Democrat favorable areas in Kenosha and Racine, which I realized this like a month ago. Racine was closer than Kenosha in this election. That's kind of insane. But perhaps you could see some suburban areas in like Milwaukee bleeding into Racine and Kenosha, flip Republican. While Dane, I really don't see Dane going down that much. Maybe some university educated, maybe the university educated population shifts to Vance a little bit. They've been kind of doing that in recent cycles, but I don't think by enough to make the state anywhere close to a likely margin, maybe 3 points. And I think New Hampshire, you see Vance do a lot better among suburbanites in New Hampshire. He's already poised to do. He's poised to do a little bit better among highly educated voters, but I think especially Beshear, rich Democrats in New Hampshire. I'm starting to wonder if New Hampshire really is as anti-incumbency as we think it is. 2022 really made me think. Well, 2022, I thought the state is anti-incumbency, but they just hate Republicans more, which then I expected like a D+7 result. In 2024, especially early on, when it started to seem better for Trump, I think I had it narrowly under 5%, but a 2.8% margin. At some point, I just think that the anti incumbency sentiment in New Hampshire has faded. Like, if it didn't hit in 2022, I don't see how it hit in 2024 by like 6 points more. So I think potentially anti incumbency could catch up to Vance in New Hampshire, but I think mostly even if that happens, you see a drop off in some of these suburban urban areas like Manchester, Nashua, Dover, Concord for New Hampshire compared to Harris. I hate how they don't have the swing map for each of these cities. Well, I think you see Vans running up a lot more in like the Salem area, the surrounding areas around that. Very exurban, very Trumpian, with some suburban elements, which I think Vance does better with. And I think he continues to push the Republican margin forward in the north, like Berlin County. I say county because I think these are counties. Berlin Township flipped between 2020 and 2024. And this northern area is very Trump favorable. Like the two areas shifting the most Republican are this northern area and then the southwestern area. I think he does better in both of those areas, but also does better in like traditionally Republican areas of Manchester, Concord, Dover. Usually the path Republicans take to win the state through. Not as big as Ayotte, but kind of to some extent like Ayotte, where he probably wins Manchester. If he doesn't, it very narrowly loses it. Does a lot better in these suburban areas around places like Concord, around places like Nashua and Manchester. Narrows the margin in places like Dover. Obviously, doesn't like Windover or any of the places near it, but does decently enough to not get himself crushed. You know, it's not the biggest Republican win, but it's like a 1 to 2% win. It's not for leaning Andy Beshear. I don't think in New Mexico Republicans do that well. Actually, I'll hold off on New Mexico since New Mexico, the strategy for Republicans is you got to do better with suburbanites in like Santa Fe and Bernalillo. Otherwise, you really can't rely on Hispanic trends. But Andy Beshear is uniquely terrible with suburbanites, so I think honestly, uh, you can make an argument that New Mexico is under one. Well, I do think, even though he's doing terribly with suburbanites, I think Virginia ends up lean. It's a narrow lean, like a 3 point margin, but I think you'll see enough black voters turn out and enough demographic change, like the Richmond area. You could potentially see Republicans do better in Nova and Hampton Roads. I could see that happening in the center of the state. I think it's close to a 1 point margin, but I think it's like a 1.5 point margin for Bashir, just because I think the Democratic margins in Nova hold just enough. You do worse enough in the Richmond metropolitan area. You don't do great in Hampton Roads, like Vance flips to Virginia Beach and probably Chesapeake as well. Maybe some like James City, maybe on a good night. Though once again, a lot of black voters are moving from the rural areas of the state into these urban areas, which is making them trend Democrat. But I think you'll see rural areas shift Republican, and some of these like rural to suburban areas like Stafford, parts of Fauquier, parts of Loudoun County shift Republican, but not enough to give the state to Vance. I also think Maine at large ends up leaning Democrat. Um, it really isn't looking that good for Republicans long term in Maine at large. You're seeing some slight Republican shifts, but like Aroostook County has no votes in it. Like you're netting 10,000 votes in it, which isn't any, or less than 10,000 votes in it, which isn't anything. That's the most out of any county in the state. Oh, well, Benebosca, you're netting slightly more. Congrats, that's a 2 point shift. Like, Republicans just aren't going to win Maine because Cumberland is just too Democrat of an area, barely should have Republican. You're doing better in Portland. You're not doing good in the suburban areas around it, but I do think the coast slightly shifts Republican. There are quite a few coastal elites. That's why I think it's under five, but I don't think Republicans will get it too much further under five. Anytime soon. I really don't think Maine is a competitive state heading into the future. So these are the remaining states I think are under one. The first state I think that Vance flips from Trump's performance, besides for New Hampshire, is Minnesota. I think Minnesota. Long term, Republicans can win it without the suburbs, but short term, you got to crack Minneapolis. You got to do better in Hennepin County, and I think Beshear is a terrible enough nominee that he would do especially bad among suburbanites in places like Hennepin County. I think rather than like a .7 shift, as in 2024, you see more like a 3 to 4 point shift, which is not. It does knock off quite a few Democratic votes, while you see the rest of the state solidify Republican. I think also a lot of this relatively strong performance for Kamala Harris is because Tim Walz was on the ticket. In the scenario of Lucy McBath, I mean, he'd have to choose a black woman. I chose Lucy McBath because I guess some Sun Metal appeal. It really didn't go that well for him. But he probably doesn't pick Tim Walz again. If he does, he's going to lose black voters left, right, and center. But I think as you see, I mean, as you saw kind of in Indiana, Trump really didn't do that great in Indiana, besides for Gary on this northwestern portion of the state, which was already trending Republican. He really didn't improve that much over his 2024 performance because Mike Pence wasn't on the ticket. I think you see a similar thing in Minnesota. And I think you see because the suburbs shift away from Democrats, J.D. Vance narrowly flips the state. I also think you see New Jersey narrowly flip. Uh, Not the closest state, or district or whatever. But I do think you see a lot of suburbanites in like Bergen County, even parts of Essex, um, Hudson County. Not really, but that's more urban and being fueled by demographics. But I think you see also places like Morris, Passaic, continues Republican. Um, a lot of these areas where Trump didn't do that well. Hunterdon, Warren, Sussex, Vance does much better in. South Jersey, perhaps it's somewhat suburban. We do have to wait and see on the gubernatorial election 2025. But I do think that with Andy Beshear bleeding suburbanites, I think you see Ocean County Republicans get a better margin out of there. In places like Burlington, Camden, Gloucester, Salem, Cumberland, and Atlantic all shift Republican, which gives Vance the narrow edge in the state. I think he flips Bergen County, maybe Middlesex on a good night. But especially with how much these northeastern margins for New Jersey Democrats are going to narrow over time, or at least should narrow if current trends hold, I think Vance would probably win New Jersey in this scenario. New Mexico, I think, narrowly holds for Bashir. I think it'd be close. I think he suffers a lot among Hispanics and even among suburbanites in the state. I definitely could see a scenario where JD Vance is able to win the state. It's pure toss up, honestly, in my opinion. I just think that the problem is these rural areas aren't big enough, and you're going to have a much bigger shift out of these suburban counties than really anything you can muster as a Republican. So I think because of that, you narrowly fall short, even though you do better with Hispanics and you make the state competitive heading into the future. Now we have the final thing we have yet to fill, which is this Nebraska second district. Much closer than I think even I imagined. I think I had it as a likely Democrat. It was only a D plus 4.6 win. The problem is it's very heavily based in Douglas County, and Douglas County really is not shifting that Republican. And I know it trended to the left of the national environment. I think mostly Douglas County is kind of steady. We will see actually, or I haven't seen it yet. But yesterday, by the time you're seeing this, there was the Omaha mayoral election prediction. I'm gonna say Stoller loses by like 1-2, which means Democrats flip Omaha. But you will see that. See if more of an establishmentarian uh, wing of the GOP can hold in a place like Omaha. But I think if it were the old Nebraska second, which was Douglas and like a little bit of Sarpy, JD Vance would lose. I just don't think you can narrow Douglas that much. But it is a redder district. It was Douglas was D plus 10. It was only D plus 4.6 for the rest of the district. I think if you have Douglas get like within four, which I could see Vance doing just because Beshear is that bad at appealing to suburbanites, I think you can see Nebraska second narrowly flip Republican, which is one of the only times I'll have it flipping Republican. I just think Beshear's complete lack of electoral appeal is concentrated almost exclusively in the suburbs and with Hispanics. So I think because of that, you have JD Vance winning 341 to Bashir's 197. Um, it's a pretty big pretty big for fucking voice crack. But it's a pretty big electoral wipeout for Andy Bashir. Serves him right. He's one of the most deplorable human beings I have ever seen. Uh, Legitimately disgusting to me and should disgust you. But this is why I don't nominate terrible people for office. And if you want to be like, oh, but Trump did something, if your entire philosophy is defined by insulting Trump, I'm not the problem anymore, kids. If you live solely off of, but Trump did worse, you like, what are you gonna do when Trump isn't in office? Like, if Andy Bashir is gonna run his campaign on, oh, but yes, I threatened to rape JD Vance's family, but Trump did worse. Like, you're going to lose easily. This is the type of electoral map you get with that strategy. But like, Bashir's just a legitimately detestable human being, no charisma whatsoever, would severely underperform in the suburbs, and even before the scandal, did not do well in the suburban areas like Louisville on his gubernatorial runs. And I just think has really no appeal outside of Kentucky. Would not get the nomination. If he did, it would be forced, and he wouldn't do well in the general election whatsoever. So, anyways, thank you for watching. Subscribe if you are new. We're very close to 3,000 subscribers. Thank you for watching. Godspeed, Dusters.